Hi, welcome back to the Sagebrush Coffee blog. I'm Matt and I'm here to talk a little bit about espresso. There is a very common question, which is why don't you have espresso beans? And the honest answer to that is because there is no such thing. So today I want to talk a little bit about what espresso beans are and the different flavor profiles that you would get from an espresso machine that matches up with the beans that you may want to use for your espresso machine. I want to talk about the meaning of espresso brewing, the popularity of espresso and kind of where that came from, and really finish with how do you pick the right coffee beans for your espresso brews. So if you are brewing espresso at home, whether you're using a $50 espresso machine or a $5,000 espresso machine, there are real coffee flavor profiles that you want to look for that will help your cup of espresso taste way better. And so that's what we want to focus on. We don't want to talk about how there are specific beans for an espresso, but that you want specific flavor profiles in your cup of espresso. And I hope that distinction makes sense. So let's start a little bit by what espresso is. We've all had it. We've all gone to espresso shops, coffee shops, and ordered a latte. We also have all brewed a cup of coffee at home, probably in a Mr. Coffee coffee pot or something like that. Those are two very, very different brewing methods. And the way to think about it is one uses the water temperature and time to extract flavor from the coffee beans. And the other one really uses, it's water temperature, but really uses pressure to extract the flavor from the beans. If you think about it, you can kind of see in your mind an espresso machine brewing and it makes that sound and that's the pressure being pushed on the beans. And you get a shot of espresso in somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 seconds, give or take. And that is going to be your espresso shot. So obviously time isn't having a big impact on that, where if you brew your normal coffee pot, it's like 4 minutes. So what's that difference? The difference is the pressure is creating the flavor. When that happens, it's a much smaller shot. You know, a shot of espresso is 1.5 ounces. And so it's a lot more compact of flavor. And that's why people add milk. That's why people add water for Americanos. Many people like the flavor of a shot of espresso and will just drink it straight. My personal favorite is a cortado, which is like a 50-50 blend of cream and espresso. You have that flavor profile of espresso, and so obviously it's going to draw you to think about what does an espresso taste like. There are multiple flavors in espresso. You know, I put on the website, at Sagebrush Coffee, we have flavors that we describe for every single coffee, and those run the gambit of your brewing methods, whether it's drip, espresso, or anywhere in between. With espresso, there are distinct flavors that come out of an espresso shot that you're going to notice versus any other type of brewing method. So those flavors are really the bitterness, the acidity, and the richness. And an espresso shot is going to be more bitter, more acidic, and more rich than any other brewing method. And so you want to think about, well, what are these flavors and how does the coffee itself play into that? And so if I'm looking at bitterness, so bitterness is usually defined as something that's pungent or just not a very good flavor. You look it up, you Google, hey, what does bitterness taste like? Most of the descriptors are negative. However, with the advent and popularity of IPAs these days, bitterness is actually a very good thing. The more your palate refines, the more you realize that you actually do want some bitterness in your coffee. If you had a cup of coffee that had zero bitterness whatsoever, it would be terrible. You might as well drink, I don't know, water. You want bitterness and you want to pull that out, but you don't want it to be so bitter that it's undrinkable. And so that's where you have to think about that flavor within the coffee that you're selecting. Acidity is basically another word for how sour it is. Espresso is a much more, pulls more acidity out of the beans, and so it's going to taste more sour. So if you have a coffee that is already acidity, like the natural process Ethiopians that I usually like are highly acidic and very sour. And so if you see a coffee that is more acidic, just think of the fact that you're going to brew it as an espresso and you're putting an exclamation point next to that acidity, and you probably don't want that unless you love it. Richness, which a lot of people will describe as boldness, the easiest way I know how to describe it is that the flavor just fills your mouth. Espresso is the richest way you're going to drink the coffee. And so that's why you want to think about these three flavor elements when you're picking your espresso bean. A lot of roasters will do that work for you, and they will call it an espresso bean because they've looked at the bitterness, they've looked at the acidity, they've looked at the boldness or the richness and said, I think this is going to play well with espresso and we're going to call it an espresso bean. Sagebrush has done that in our history. We've had coffees that we've listed as espresso beans. The problem with that is it kind of pigeonholes the coffee, and you could have a coffee that you call an espresso bean, but it's phenomenal in a Chemex or in a drip, and so you've pigeonholed it. I've kind of moved away from calling coffees espresso beans, and I'm really just tagging them as here's our top 5 or so favorite coffees for espresso. And those are coffees that take into account the added bitterness, acidity, and richness that you get from pulling an espresso shot. So I think that kind of sums it up. Espresso really is a unique way to drink coffee. If you're going to put a lot of milk in it, for instance, in a latte, where 80% of your cup is milk or foam milk, you want to have high richness, high bitterness, and the correct amount of acidity in that coffee bean. If you use an espresso bean that is really light and not very bold for a latte, it's just not going to taste like very much. Or if you use a highly acidic coffee for an Americano, it's gonna be really sour, and most people don't want really sour. As you're picking your coffees, look at those notes, look at some of the fruit that we take pictures of. If we put a lemon in that photo, it's usually highly acidic. If we put dark chocolate in that photo, that's usually a sign for bitterness. Really, really dark chocolate is the best way I know how to describe bitterness. And then just kind of keep your eye out for the country of origins that have the more bold flavors, and that will help you pick the right coffee for your espresso. I'll put some links down below with our recommendations for espresso machines, some of our favorite espresso beans that we sell on the site, as well as a blog post that talks about this in a little bit more detail. Go ahead and like and subscribe. We're trying to put these videos out every couple of weeks, and so click the bell so that you can get notified when a new video is out. Thanks a lot.